Can you imagine your own father threatening to have you arrested for raising his kids? For loving them? For being the only parent they'd ever truly known? He looked me right in the eye, bloodlessly, and said, "You're just their sister. Know your place." That's what he said to me. And honestly, that was just the beginning of a nightmare that ended with him broken, sobbing in therapy, unable to answer the simplest question about his own children. That was almost a year ago. My little brother Nolan was born, and his first word? Not mom, not dad. It was Sloan. My name. My entire childhood became about taking care of him, and eventually my little sister Katie, too. While other girls my age were saving up for concert tickets, I was in checkout lines, buying applesauce pouches for Nolan's lunches. And you know what? I loved every single minute of it. Seeing the pure joy on Nolan and Katie's faces when I set out their lunches was the most rewarding thing in my world. Our parents, well, according to them, they had more important things to do. Dad discovered his passion for multi-level marketing the year Nolan was born, and he'd been selling gut health out of our garage ever since. Mom, on the other hand, loved her job because her regional manager, Grant, was always checking in on her personally. And boy, did those two take a lot of team-building retreats together. Honestly, I preferred it that way. It forced me to step up in ways I never would have otherwise. Every time our parents forgot a parent-teacher conference or Katie's dance recital, I got to be there instead. I got to be the reason their faces lit up. I opened a savings account the day I turned 16, depositing every single dollar from my part-time job, knowing we'd need it when Dad inevitably drained the grocery money on another inventory buy-in. And for a while, our system worked perfectly. I'd wake up at 5:30 a.m. to pack lunches and check homework while our parents slept in. The kids never went hungry, never missed an assignment, never felt unloved. And to me, that was all that mattered. But then, at Nolan's high school graduation, something insane happened. All five of us went together. Dad even wore something other than a company polo, and Mom actually kept her phone in her purse for a full 10 minutes. They sat in the front row like they'd earned those seats, posting photos with captions about their brilliant son. When he walked across the stage, tears were streaming down my face. I felt like I was watching my own child grow up. 400 names later, it was finally time to leave. Or so I thought. Because that's when Nolan got back up on stage to give a speech. "This speech isn't about me," he started. "It's about the person who made sure I'd be standing here today. He found me in the crowd and we locked eyes. I wiped my face, embarrassed. When I was 7," he continued, his voice ringing through the silent auditorium, "I went into a diabetic coma in a Walmart parking lot. The person who caught me before my head hit the pavement was my sister Sloan, who was 14 and had to argue with a paramedic who kept asking to speak to an adult." The auditorium fell silent. Even the rustling of programs stopped. "Most kids learn to count carbs from a nutritionist," Nolan said, his voice laced with emotion. "I learned it at a kitchen table at 6 a.m. from a girl who taught herself out of library books because the appointment nobody drove me to was the appointment that would have taught me." Dad's phone slipped from his hand, clattering on the floor. Mom's jaw was clenched so tight I could see the muscle twitching. "So, Mom and Dad," Nolan said, his tone gentle, almost light-hearted, "thank you for giving me the best role model I could ask for." He raised his diploma toward me. "This is yours as much as mine, Sloan. Actually, it's more yours, because while you were raising us, you gave up your own chance at being a kid." Whispers rippled through the crowd. Our extended family members were turning to stare at my parents. Aunt Claire's mouth had fallen open. Uncle Colton was slowly shaking his head, connecting dots from years of missed family gatherings. The applause started slowly, then built to thunder. After the ceremony, our relatives swarmed us. Not our parents, just us. Grandma grabbed my face in her weathered hands, sobbing apologies for not realizing sooner. "We thought you were just being a helpful big sister." She wept. My parents left before the reception ended. Their carefully maintained image was shattered beyond repair, but they weren't done with me. 48 hours later, I was helping Katie stretch for her dance recital when the doorbell rang. Two women in pastel cardigans stood on my porch, CPS badges glinting in the afternoon sun. My blood ran cold. Literally cold. They walked past me like I wasn't even there, documenting everything with phones and notepads. the laminated insulin log I'd created to track Nolan's numbers became evidence of unauthorized medical decisions. The calendar with everyone's appointments color-coded by kid was assuming parental authority without legal standing. Even the refrigerator, stocked and labeled and organized by expiration date, was somehow twisted into overcompensation for neglect. And suddenly, everything clicked. Everything made a horrible, terrifying sense. Because as they made calls about emergency placement orders, the woman said, yes, the biological parents called in the report. They're willing to resume full custody immediately. The CPS workers split up, one heading upstairs while the other cornered Katie in the living room. I watched helplessly as they asked her question after question about our daily routines. Katie, sweet and trusting, answered everything honestly. She told them how I made her breakfast every morning, how I signed her permission slips, how I picked her up from dance practice. Each innocent answer twisted into another mark against me in their notebooks. Nolan came through the front door, backpack slung over one shoulder, and froze at the scene. The CPS worker immediately redirected her attention to him, asking about his graduation speech. His face went pale as she suggested someone might have coached him to say those things, that maybe he'd felt pressured to embarrass his parents in public. I saw the confusion flash across his face before pure anger replaced it. The pieces clicked together in my mind like a horrible puzzle. Our parents had weaponized my love for my siblings. Every act of care, every moment I'd stepped up when they'd stepped back, was now evidence of me overstepping boundaries. They'd turned protection into prosecution. The lead CPS worker gathered her papers and delivered the blow. We had 72 hours until an emergency custody hearing. Unless I could prove I had legal standing as their caregiver, Katie and Nolan would be placed with our parents immediately. The words hit me like physical punches. Legal standing. I'd been their parent in every way that mattered for years, but on paper, I was just their sister. My phone started buzzing immediately. Word travels fast in our neighborhood. Soon Aunt Claire was calling, then Uncle Colton, then cousins I hadn't heard from in months. The gossip mill was churning, and everyone wanted to know if it was true that CPS had shown up at our house. Grandma arrived within the hour, her face etched with worry. She pulled me aside while the kids did homework upstairs, keeping their routine as normal as possible, despite the chaos. She offered to help however she could, but warned me that family courts almost always sided with biological parents. The system didn't care who'd actually raised the children, only who'd signed the birth certificate. Our parents' car pulled into the driveway just as Grandma was leaving. They walked in like they owned the place, which, technically, they did, wearing matching expressions of concern. Dad went straight to the kitchen and actually started cooking dinner, something he hadn't done in years. The smell of garlic and scorched butter felt foreign in our house. Mom sat down with Nolan to help with homework, her phone nowhere in sight for once. The performance was flawless. They knew exactly what they were doing, creating a paper trail of sudden parental involvement. Every interaction was staged for maximum impact, preparing evidence for the custody hearing. When Katie came downstairs, Dad swept her into a hug that made my sister stiffen with surprise. Later that night, after the kids were in bed, my parents cornered me in the hallway. Their masks dropped completely. They made it clear that if I fought the custody transfer, they'd file criminal charges. The word kidnapping hung in the air between us like a physical threat. And when I asked my father why he was doing this, why he'd called the state on his own daughter for feeding his own children, he looked at me the way you look at a stranger who's parked in your spot. Because you just their sister, he said. Know your place. They'd thought of everything, planned every angle. My protection had become a weapon they could use against me. I spent the rest of the night researching lawyers. Grandma had given me a name, someone who specialized in family law. The consultation was sobering. Siblings had almost no rights in these situations unless the parents could be proven unfit. Being absent wasn't enough. Being neglectful wasn't enough. The bar was set impossibly high, and my parents were already working to clear it with their sudden burst of parenting theater. The next morning started their new routine. Dad was up making breakfast, badly. The eggs were rubber. The bacon was raw in the middle. But he served it with a smile while Mom asked about everyone's plans for the day. Neither of them knew Katie had dance practice or that Nolan was almost out of test strips. They were playing house with children they barely knew. I started documenting everything. every missed appointment they didn't know about, every schedule they couldn't remember, every routine they disrupted. But even as I gathered evidence, they were creating their own. Dad signed up for the PTA, Mom scheduled parent-teacher conferences. They were rewriting history in real time. The manipulation reached new levels when I overheard them coaching Katie. They were in her room, telling her how much happier she'd be living with Mommy and Daddy full-time. They painted pictures of family vacations we all knew would never happen. Promised attention they'd never given. Katie's confused responses broke my heart. She didn't understand why she was being asked to lie about what she wanted. When Katie started crying, our parents had their next piece of evidence. They claimed her distress proved I'd psychologically manipulated her against them. Every genuine emotion, every authentic bond I'd built with my siblings over years of actual parenting was being twisted into proof of inappropriate control. The truth didn't matter anymore, only the narrative they were building. Extended family members began showing up throughout the week. Aunt Claire brought casseroles. Uncle Colton stopped by to fix a leaky faucet. Our cousins suddenly remembered we existed. Everyone wanted to witness our parents' transformation firsthand. The house felt like a stage, and we were all unwilling actors in their performance. Mom and Dad played their parts perfectly when family was around. They asked about school projects they'd never cared about before. They watched Katie's practice video on repeat, commenting enthusiastically each time. They helped Nolan organize his college applications despite not knowing what schools he was interested in or what he wanted to study. Every interaction was calculated for maximum witness impact. The 72 hours passed in a blur of legal preparation and parental performance art. Our parents had assembled an impressive array of false evidence, forged signatures on old permission slips, backdated calendar entries showing their involvement in school events, even staged photos from activities they'd never attended. They'd been planning this for longer than just since Nolan's graduation speech. By the time the emergency custody hearing approached, I felt like I was drowning. Every truth I knew about our family was being rewritten. Every sacrifice I'd made was being reframed as selfish control. Every moment of love I'd shown my siblings was being twisted into something sinister. But I couldn't give up. Not when Katie still crawled into my bed after nightmares. Not when Nolan still texted me before every meal out of habit. Not when I was the only parent they'd ever really known. The extended family was divided. Some saw through our parents' act, remembering years of absence and neglect. Others bought into the performance, choosing to believe that blood trumped everything else. The battle lines were drawn, and my siblings were caught in the middle, confused and scared by the sudden upheaval in their lives. As we prepared for the hearing, I held on to one truth. Love wasn't just biology. It was showing up every day, knowing their favorite foods, remembering their fears, celebrating their victories. It was being there when they were sick, scared, or struggling. It was choosing them over and over again, even when it meant sacrificing everything else. Our parents might share their DNA, but I'd shared their lives. And somehow, I had to make the court see that difference. The morning of the hearing arrived with an unseasonable chill that matched the ice in my stomach. I dressed carefully in the only blazer I owned, the one I bought for job interviews, while listening to Mom and Dad rehearse their testimonies downstairs. Their voices carried through the thin walls as they practiced sounding devastated about their children's supposed alienation from them. Katie appeared in my doorway, her dance outfit in hand. She'd insisted on bringing it to the courthouse, convinced that somehow the hearing would end in time for her recital that evening. I helped her pack it carefully in her backpack, both of us pretending this was just another normal day, where I'd make sure she got where she needed to be. Nolan emerged from his room looking older than his 18 years. Dark circles shadowed his eyes from a week of disrupted sleep. His kit sat untouched on his dresser because our parents had forbidden me from managing his supplies anymore, and neither of them had thought to pick up the refill I'd hauled in 3 days earlier. He'd been rationing without telling me. I found out because he'd started sleeping in his socks the way he did when he was scared of waking up dizzy. The courthouse loomed, gray and imposing against the morning sky. Our parents arrived separately in their nicest clothes, projecting an image of responsible adults who'd simply been trying to reconnect with children, stolen from them by an overbearing sibling. They'd even hired a professional photographer to document their arrival, creating more evidence of their supposed dedication. Inside the family court waiting area, the divide was visible. Aunt Claire and Uncle Colton sat firmly on our side of the room, their faces set with determination. Grandma clutched her purse like a weapon, ready to fight for us however she could. But several cousins and family friends had gravitated toward our parents, swayed by their performance of reformed caregivers. My lawyer, a tired-looking woman named Renata, who'd seen too many family disasters, reviewed our evidence one final time. Birth certificates, school records, medical documents, years of proof that I'd been the one showing up. But she warned me again, the paperwork rarely trumped biology in family court. The courtroom itself felt smaller than I'd expected, more like a conference room than the grand halls of justice from TV shows. Judge Wells presided with an expression that suggested she'd already made up her mind before hearing a word of testimony. The court reporter's fingers hovered over her keys, ready to document the destruction of our family. Our parents' lawyer painted a picture of devoted parents whose attempts to provide for their family had been misunderstood. Dad's garage full of unsold inventory became entrepreneurial spirit. Mom's absences became necessary sacrifice for financial stability. They'd crafted a narrative where their neglect was reframed as tough love, preparing their children for independence. When Dad took the stand, he cried on cue. He spoke about the pain of watching his eldest daughter turn his babies against him, how he'd tried so hard to be involved, but I'd pushed him away at every turn. The performance was Oscar-worthy, complete with a trembling chin and perfectly timed tears. Mom's testimony focused on how I'd undermined her authority in her own home. She claimed I'd deliberately scheduled the children's activities during her work hours to exclude her. The fact that she'd never known their schedules in the first place was conveniently omitted from her version of events. The CPS workers presented their findings with clinical detachment. They'd observed a household where parental roles were confused, where a sibling had assumed inappropriate levels of responsibility. Their recommendation was clear. The children should be returned to their biological parents immediately, with supervised visits from me to ease the transition. During a brief recess, I found Nolan in the hallway, his back against the wall, breathing the slow way I'd taught him. His hands were shaking. He grabbed my arm with desperate strength, begging me not to let them take him and Katie. I promised him I'd fight with everything I had, even as I felt the case slipping away. Back in the courtroom, Renata called our witnesses. Aunt Claire testified about years of holiday dinners where I'd been the one making sure the kids ate on schedule while our parents socialized. Uncle Colton described driving Katie to dance classes because I couldn't drive yet, and our parents were always busy. Their words painted the real picture of our family, but I could see the judge's skepticism. Grandma's testimony was the most powerful. She spoke about finding me doing laundry at age 10 because Dad was in the garage running a webinar for a downline that didn't exist yet. She described birthday parties where I'd bake the cakes because our parents forgot. Her voice cracked as she admitted she should have intervened sooner but had believed keeping the family together was more important than acknowledging the dysfunction. The judge ordered a brief psychological evaluation of the children to be conducted immediately by the court psychologist. This wasn't standard procedure, but something in Grandma's testimony had sparked a flicker of doubt about the neat narrative our parents had presented. I waited in the hallway while Katie was interviewed first. Through the door, I could hear her small voice trying to explain why she felt safer with me than with Mommy and Daddy. The psychologist's questions were gentle but probing, designed to detect coaching or manipulation. Nolan's interview was harder to listen to. He talked about the morning routines I'd established that kept him steady, the systems I'd built so he'd never have to think about it before a test. He described our parents' recent attempts at involvement as scary and confusing, like strangers suddenly claiming ownership of his body. While we waited for the psychologist's report, our parents made their next move. They announced they'd enrolled in parenting classes, showing certificates of completion dated suspiciously close to when they'd first called CPS. They produced character references from neighbors who'd never actually seen them interact with their children but were happy to sign supportive statements. The psychologist's preliminary findings were mixed. While both children showed strong attachment to me, the court couldn't ignore the biological relationship. The recommendation was for a gradual transition, with the children spending increasing time with our parents, while I was slowly phased out of their daily lives. Renata argued passionately that this would traumatize Katie and Nolan, but the judge seemed unmoved. The law was clear. Absent evidence of abuse or severe neglect, biological parents retained primary rights. The fact that I'd been the one raising them was touching, but legally irrelevant. As the hearing progressed, our parents' masks began slipping. When questioned about Nolan's routine, Dad couldn't say what happened before a meal versus after one. When asked about Katie's dance teacher's name, Mom drew a blank. These small failures accumulated, but would they be enough? During another recess, I overheard our parents in the hallway. They were discussing their plans to move the children to Dad's brother's place in another state where they could start fresh, without the interference of extended family. The conversation confirmed my worst fears. They didn't want to pair at Nolan and Katie, they wanted to win. I alerted Renata immediately, but without a recording, it was my word against theirs. She advised me to remain calm, that any emotional outburst would be used as evidence of instability. So, I sat quietly as my family's future was debated by strangers who'd never seen Katie's face light up at a clean landing, or talked Nolan down at 2 a.m. when his hands wouldn't stop shaking. The judge ordered a more comprehensive family assessment. Frustrated by the conflicting testimonies, this meant another delay, another period of limbo. But it also meant another chance. Over the following weeks, the court-appointed assessor became a regular fixture in our home. She observed mealtimes where our parents struggled to remember who liked what foods. She watched homework sessions where they couldn't help with basic assignments. She documented the children's increasing anxiety as their routines continued to crumble. Our parents responded by escalating their control. They installed cameras in the common areas, claiming it was for the children's safety, but really monitoring my every interaction with Katie and Nolan. They instituted a rule that I couldn't be alone with either sibling, forcing all our conversations to happen under their suspicious gaze. The strain began showing on Katie first. Her dancing, always a source of joy and expression, became mechanical and lifeless. She stopped eating properly, pushing food around her plate at dinners where our parents forced conversation about topics they knew nothing about. Her teacher called, concerned about the sudden change in her most dedicated student. Nolan's situation deteriorated faster. Without a consistent routine, his numbers swung wildly. He was tired all the time. He missed assignment deadlines, forgot about tests, and struggled to focus even on subjects he loved. Our parents' solution was to ground him for poor performance, not understanding that punishment wouldn't fix a body they refused to help him manage. I documented everything meticulously, every skipped check, every forgotten appointment, every sign of the children's declining well-being. But I had to be careful. Our parents were watching for any sign that I was undermining their authority, ready to use it as ammunition in court. The extended family began choosing sides more firmly. Aunt Claire started visiting daily, ostensibly to help, but really to monitor our parents' behavior. She brought groceries when Dad forgot to shop, reminded Mom about school events she'd never remember otherwise. Her presence was a lifeline, but it also agitated our parents. Uncle Colton took a different approach. He offered our parents money, suggesting they might be too financially stressed to properly care for the children. The offer was rejected with indignation, but it revealed something important. This wasn't about money or resources, it was about control and image. One evening, I found Katie crying in her room. She'd overheard our parents discussing boarding schools, places where she and Nolan could get an excellent education while they focused on rebuilding their lives. The casualness with which they discussed shipping their children away confirmed what I'd always known. We were accessories to them, not family. The assessment ground on for weeks. The social worker interviewed teachers, coaches, neighbors. Slowly, a pattern emerged that even the most biased observer couldn't ignore. In every aspect of the children's lives, I was the constant, while our parents were shadows. But our parents had one more card to play. They filed a police report claiming I'd been emotionally abusing the children, turning them against their rightful guardians. The accusation was baseless, but required investigation. Suddenly, I wasn't just fighting for custody. I was defending myself against criminal allegations. The police interviews were grueling. They questioned every decision I'd made, every boundary I'd crossed in caring for my siblings. Had I overstepped by signing permission slips? Was calling in a refill an abuse of assumed authority? The questions made me doubt myself, even as I knew I'd only done what was necessary. Katie and Nolan were interviewed separately by specialists trained in detecting abuse. Their consistent stories of love and care should have ended the investigation immediately. But our parents kept pushing, claiming the children were too traumatized to recognize the manipulation they'd suffered. The psychological evaluation of our parents revealed what we'd all known. They had no real understanding of their children's needs, personalities, or daily lives. They couldn't name Katie's best friend or Nolan's favorite subject. They didn't know about Katie's pre-performance rituals or the way Nolan counted backward from 10 when he felt himself going low. But the evaluation also revealed something unexpected. Our parents genuinely believed their version of events. In their minds, they'd been devoted parents, whose children had been stolen by an overreaching sibling. The delusion was so complete that they passed the credibility screening. They weren't lying. They'd rewritten history in their own minds. This revelation complicated everything. Judges were more likely to side with parents who seemed sincere, even if sincerely wrong, than with siblings who appeared to be undermining parental authority. Renata warned me that we were losing ground, that the court might order immediate transfer of custody despite all evidence to the contrary. The investigation's expansion meant more delays. Katie's dance recital came and went without her participation because our parents didn't think it was important enough to prioritize during such a stressful time. Nolan missed his college application deadlines because no one but me had been tracking them, and I was forbidden from helping. Grandma tried to intervene more directly, offering to take temporary custody of all three of us. The suggestion sent our parents into a rage. They accused her of conspiring with me, of being part of the systematic alienation of their children. The woman who'd raised my father was suddenly an enemy to be defeated. In desperation, I reached out to an old family friend who worked in social services 2 counties over. She couldn't intervene, but she gave me one piece of advice. Build a network that could watch them, even if you couldn't. The thought of losing them made me physically ill. I'd spent over a decade being their protector, their constant, their real parent. The idea of watching from the sidelines while they suffered under our parents' neglect was unbearable. But I had to be strategic, not emotional, so I built one. Katie's dance teacher agreed to be a safe adult she could turn to. Nolan's school counselor promised to watch him. Aunt Claire and Uncle Colton made a schedule so someone was always checking in. Our parents noticed the network forming and responded predictably. They accused me of creating a spy network, of continuing my campaign of alienation, even as the court proceedings proved their fitness as parents. Every act of care was twisted into evidence of pathology. The final assessment report was due any day. Renata prepared me for both outcomes, but her tone suggested she expected the worst. The system's bias toward biological parents was strong, and our parents had successfully painted themselves as victims of a disturbed young woman's control issues. I spent what might be my last normal evening with my siblings, helping Katie mark a routine in the garage and quizzing Nolan for a history test. We didn't talk about the liming decision. We just existed in our familiar rhythm, the one I'd created and maintained through years of necessity. That night, I lay awake planning. If the court gave our parents custody, I'd respect the order and document every single day of it. They might win this battle. I'd make sure it wasn't the end of the war. The assessment report arrived the morning of the final hearing. Renata's face, as she read it, told me everything I needed to know before she spoke. The social worker had concluded that while I'd provided exemplary care, the children belonged with their biological parents. The recommendation included a transition plan and family therapy to repair the damaged relationships. But buried in the report was a lifeline. The assessor noted serious concerns about the parents' ability to meet the children's medical and educational needs. She recommended continued involvement from extended family and regular check-ins from social services. It wasn't victory, but it wasn't complete defeat either. As we prepared to enter the courthouse for what would likely be the final hearing, Nolan grabbed my hand. His grip was steady despite everything, reminding me that the bonds we'd built over years couldn't be severed by a court order. Katie stood on my other side, her dance bag still optimistically packed, ready to perform if given the chance. Our parents arrived looking triumphant, already planning their new life with children they didn't know how to parent. They'd won the legal battle, but the real fight, the one for Katie and Nolan's actual well-being, was just beginning, and I'd be ready for every round. The final hearing stretched into the afternoon as our parents' lawyer presented their closing arguments. I watched Judge Wells's face for any sign of sympathy, but her expression remained neutral as she reviewed the mountain of evidence. Renata squeezed my shoulder when the judge announced she'd reached a decision. The courtroom fell silent as Judge Wells began reading her ruling. She acknowledged the unusual circumstances, the clear evidence that I'd been the primary caregiver for years. But the law was clear about biological parents' rights. My heart sank with each word until she reached the unexpected twist in her decision. While custody would remain with our parents, the judge imposed strict conditions, weekly check-ins with social services, mandatory family therapy. Most importantly, she granted me official visitation rights and the authority to participate in medical and educational decisions. It wasn't what I'd hoped for, but it was more than Renata had expected. Our parents' faces showed their fury at the restrictions, but they forced smiles for the photographer they'd hired. The judge dismissed us with a warning that any violation of the custody order would result in immediate review. As we filed out, I noticed my father's hands shaking as he realized their victory came with chains. Back home, the reality hit immediately. Our parents had to actually parent now, under constant supervision. Within hours, they discovered what I'd always known. Nolan's routine wasn't a thing you did at a specific time. It moved with what he ate, how much he'd walked, whether he'd slept, whether he was nervous about a test. It was a conversation you had with the body all day long. Katie's dance schedule proved equally challenging. She didn't just need rides to practice. She needed specific pre-performance meals, the right hair, and someone who understood her anxiety patterns. Dad's attempt at a French braid ended in tears and a knot they had to cut out with kitchen scissors. The first family therapy session revealed the depth of our parents' delusions. The therapist, a no-nonsense woman named Dr. Aldridge, cut through their performance within minutes. She asked simple questions about the children's lives that they couldn't answer. The silence spoke volumes. I attended as required, watching them squirm. Dr. Aldridge didn't let them deflect or blame. She made them sit in their own absence. For the first time, they couldn't retreat into the fantasy of being misunderstood. The social services check-ins became our parents' worst nightmare. The caseworker arrived unannounced, documenting the chaos. Expired food in the refrigerator because Dad forgot to shop. Nolan's supplies stored on top of the garage fridge next to the inventory where the heat had been ruining them for weeks. Katie's unwashed dance clothes because laundry wasn't a priority. Within 2 weeks, cracks appeared in their united front. Dad started drinking more, unable to cope with the constant demands of actual parenting. Mom began working late again, finding excuses to avoid the homework battles and bedtime routines. They'd wanted to win, not to parent. Nolan's grades continued falling. His teachers called repeatedly, concerned about his declining performance. Our parents' solution was to blame the school, the teachers, even Nolan himself. They couldn't accept that parenting required more than just being present. Katie withdrew into herself, her vibrant personality dimming under our parents' inconsistent attention. She stopped practicing at home, claiming she didn't feel like dancing anymore. Her teacher called me directly, violating the custody order, but desperate to help her star student. The extended family network we built proved invaluable. Aunt Claire accidentally showed up at dinner time, 3 nights a week for months. Uncle Colton offered to drive Katie to practice when our parents forgot. Grandma brought groceries and cooked meals, maintaining some stability in the chaos. Our parents resented every intervention, but they couldn't refuse without admitting their incompetence. They were trapped in their own victory, forced to maintain the facade of caring parents while drowning in the reality of what that meant. 3 months in, the situation exploded. Nolan went low during a test, and nobody in the room knew what was happening to him. The school called an emergency meeting, threatening to involve additional authorities if his medical needs weren't met. Our parents sat silent as educators explained what I'd always known about my brother. That night, I found Nolan in the garage, stacking Dad's unsold inventory into towers, then knocking them down, then stacking them again. He didn't speak, but his eyes begged for help. I couldn't legally manage anything for him anymore, but I could sit on the floor with him and count backward from 10 until his hands went quiet. Katie's dance recital approached, with our parents clueless about preparations. They didn't know she needed to arrive 2 hours early, that she required specific snacks for energy, that her costume needed particular undergarments. Their fumbling attempts to help only increased her anxiety. The morning of the recital, Katie appeared at my door at 5 a.m., fully dressed, but with tangled hair and smudged makeup. I spent an hour fixing what our parents had attempted, careful not to violate the custody order while ensuring she could perform with confidence. At the recital, our parents sat in the audience like cardboard cutouts. They clapped at the wrong moments, took flash photography despite repeated warnings, and left immediately after Katie's number without watching her receive her award. I stayed, cheering loud enough for all of us. Dr. Tout. Aldridge called an emergency session after the recital disaster. She didn't mince words about our parents' failure to meet basic parenting standards. Then she put down her pen and asked my father 2 questions. What is Nolan's favorite subject? My father opened his mouth. Nothing came out. He looked at my mother, and my mother looked at the carpet. Who is Katie's best friend? And I watched a man who had threatened to have me arrested for feeding his children, a man who had stood in a hallway and told me to know my place, sit in a soft chair in a beige room and understand for the first time in 19 years that he did not know a single thing about the people he had gone to war to own. He didn't answer. He put his face in his hands and he sobbed. Not the crying he'd done on the stand. That had been a performance with a trembling chin and perfect timing. This was ugly. This was a sound I'd never heard him make. A sound like something structural giving way. And he made it for a long time while nobody in the room said anything because there was nothing to say. He didn't know his daughter's best friend's name. He had never known it. And now there were 3 witnesses and a file. The admission changed nothing immediately. But it opened a door. Dr. F. Aldridge suggested intensive parenting classes, not the perfunctory ones they'd taken before. Real education about child development, chronic illness management, and emotional support. Our parents agreed reluctantly, seeing no alternative. I used every legal visitation hour I had, filling them with homework, routines, the support our parents couldn't give. The restrictions chafed, but they beat complete separation. 6 months into the new arrangement, our parents made a shocking announcement. They were separating. The stress of actual parenting had shattered their already fragile relationship. Dad blamed Mom for the situation. Mom accused Dad of weakness. Mine accused Dad of weakness. Neither accepted responsibility for their children's needs. The separation complicated custody further. Neither parent wanted sole responsibility. They negotiated who'd take which days, treating Katie and Nolan like furniture. The children's anxiety skyrocketed. During a particularly heated exchange, Dad made a revealing comment about moving out of state for a fresh start. The casualness with which he discussed abandoning his children confirmed what I'd suspected. Given the chance, he'd disappear entirely. Mom wasn't much better. She talked about finding herself and needing space to heal. The children were obstacles to her self-discovery, burdens she'd never wanted to carry. The performance of devoted parenthood crumbled completely. Dr. Aldridge documented everything meticulously, the failed routines, the missed appointments, the emotional neglect disguised as parental rights. Her reports to the court painted a devastating picture of parents who'd won custody but lost interest in parenting. The breaking point came 3 weeks later. Our parents mixed up Nolan's doses, giving him double one day and nothing the next. And by the time anyone noticed, he was on the bathroom floor. The hospital called me because I was still listed as his emergency contact, a violation of the custody order our parents had never bothered to correct. That was the whole thing in the end. Not a lie, not a scheme. A form they couldn't be troubled to fill out. I spent 18 hours by his bed. Our parents arrived separately, argued in the hallway about whose fault it was, and left without resolving anything. The nurses documented all of it. Nolan squeezed my hand and whispered an apology for causing trouble. Katie found me in the cafeteria at 3 a.m. She'd taken 3 buses alone to get there, terrified for her brother. She was 13 and she was navigating a transit system in the dark because neither of her parents could be bothered to drive her. We sat together, sharing vending machine snacks and pretending everything would be okay. The hospital's social worker filed a report that triggered immediate court review. The neglect was undeniable now. Nolan could have died, and it wouldn't have been a tragedy. It would have been an outcome. Renata worked tirelessly preparing for the emergency hearing. This time, we had documented proof, not just absence, medical records, therapy notes, social services reports, and witness statements painted an undeniable picture. Our parents had been given every opportunity and failed spectacularly. The emergency hearing was different from the first. Judge Wells's neutrality cracked as she reviewed the hospital records. She questioned her parents directly about Nolan's routine, and their fumbling responses revealed their dangerous incompetence. Dad cried again, but the tears rang hollow now. Our parents' lawyer attempted damage control, arguing for continued custody with additional support. But when questioned about what support they needed, neither parent could articulate a single thing. They didn't know enough about their children to even ask for help. The guardian ad litem appointed to represent the children's interests delivered devastating testimony. Both children had explicitly stated they wanted to live with me. They felt unsafe with their biological parents, not from cruelty, but from incompetence. The system designed to protect them had handed them to it. Judge Wells ordered immediate custody transferred to me while a full investigation proceeded. Our parents protested weakly, but relief flickered in their eyes. They were exhausted from 6 months of pretending to parent. The performance had drained them completely. The ride home from court felt surreal. Katie sat in the back, clutching her dance bag like a lifeline. Nolan stared out the window. We didn't celebrate. We just breathed. The next months involved extensive legal procedures, home studies, background checks, financial evaluations. I submitted to every requirement gladly, knowing each step brought us closer to permanent stability. Renata guided us through the maze of paperwork with determination. Our parents' involvement dwindled to nothing. They missed supervised visitation appointments, forgot to call on birthdays, and eventually stopped pretending to care. Their lawyer filed paperwork indicating they wouldn't contest permanent guardianship. They'd rather lose their children than admit failure. The final guardianship hearing was anticlimactic. Our parents didn't attend. Their lawyer submitted a brief statement about recognizing the children's best interests. Judge Wells granted me full legal guardianship with a sharp comment about biological parents who abandoned their responsibilities. Katie danced at her next recital, and I was in the third row, her snacks in my bag and her hair braided right. Nolan started college in the fall steady, boring, unremarkable, which is all I ever wanted for him. The refrigerator is stocked and labeled and organized by expiration date, and nobody calls it overcompensation anymore. His kit is on the counter where it belongs, not on his dresser untouched. Grandma moved 4 streets over. Aunt Claire still shows up at dinner time. Uncle Colton taught Katie to drive. The card came at Christmas. Dad's handwriting, 3 lines, wishing us a good year. He'd signed it with his first and last name, the way you sign a form. And at the bottom, he'd written Katie's name wrong, not misspelled. Wrong. Katie read it twice, looked at me, and then quietly put it in the drawer where we keep the batteries and the takeout menus. What do you guys think? Have you ever had to fight for what's right, even when the system seems stacked against you? Let me know in the comments below. I really want to hear your stories.